Grand Slam, the second Grand Slam in a row in Formula One. Started from the pole position, led every lap and took the fastest lap point as well. But this time it was this man, Max Verstappen, for the Red Bull team. Disastrous weekend at home for the Scuderia Ferrari, and Max jumps to P2. It started wet, and that would have been perhaps very suitable for our regular guest, my co-host on this show, Alex Yoong, gold medalist, of course, from the 2011 Southeast Asian Games in the water skiing, Alex.
Yeah, that's definitely very wet to dry. Nice stat you have there, Matt, and we'll have the real stat man later as well. But yes, what an interesting race. Eh? Red Bull strikes back, and not just Verstappen getting P1, but his teammate with Perez in P2.
Great to have you with us. Great to have you with us, our viewers and friends around the world. Please do join us with questions and comments, of course, on Twitter at GoF1Show. We'd really like to hear from you. And also, for the first time this weekend, delighted that our show is also being shown. It's on various places, as you probably know, around the world, including our website, gof1.tv. But you can now download this app, Clutch, without a T, CLUCH.tv. And that app allows you, of course, to play on your smart device, but also on your smart television. So if you want to recline on the sofa and watch it on the big screen, clutch.tv is the place to go. And I want to introduce now another familiar face to viewers of, let's say, the good old days of Fox Sports Asia. His name is Marlon Stockinger, and raced in what we now call Formula 3 and Formula 2. He won the support race rather famously to the Monaco Grand Prix, here it is, back in 2012. He's busy these days as an ambassador for Toyota Gazoo Racing. He's launching, as we can see here, a new racing series in the Philippines for the Radical sports car. And there he is with Alex Yoong, Paula Malayali, and myself in the Fox Sports studio. Welcome to the Go F1 studio, Marlon Stockinger.
Hey, Matthew. Hey, Alex. Glad to be on again and to see familiar faces. It's kind of nice being here and excited to obviously go over this debrief with the Italian Grand Prix. It was really exciting. Delighted
to have you with us. So let's have a look at the results, shall we, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, quite exciting to see Red Bull at the front back again, like we just mentioned, Red Bull 1 and 2. Leclerc, though, that's going to be the big story, isn't he? Stalking the Red Bulls the whole race and really putting on some pressure, but that spin just towards the end of the race into the barriers. Very lucky to recover from that, I have to say. Lucky to get that P6. Great to see McLaren, Lando Norris at P3, and thanks to the stat man, we know, for the last 3 races held in Italy, this is the 3rd time in a row he's been on the podium. George Russell there with a fine 4th position. Bottas there, also great to see him in the 5th place there as well. Vettel there in 8th position. Good to see Aston Martin pick up double points with Vettel and Stroll in the top 10 as well.
Yeah, good turnaround for those guys. And before we get deeply into too many numbers and statistics, and this is probably the one about you being a gold medalist from the Southeast Asian Games, Alex, it's probably the only stat that I'll get today that our next guest, Sean Kelly, would not have known about. He's in fact called the stat man if you're in the F1 paddock, as Sean has been for the last 20 years. Sean is joining us today from Phoenix, Arizona. One of the only weekends I think that you're not going to be at a Grand Prix circuit, Sean. It's very good of you to put your free time to work with us. You've worked 20 years in the sport and 16 broadcasts, as I see here, in Formula One. Maybe it's 17 now with the Go F1 show.
As of this moment, officially number 17, Go F1. Yes, definitely. Here I am.
Fantastic. Great to have you with us. Sean, you go first then. What was your takeaway of that, the performance from Red Bull Racing?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to say that we now know that this is not a Ferrari walkover this year. And it reminds me somewhat of how the early races panned out last year between Red Bull and Mercedes, because there was a point around about the Portuguese Grand Prix early in 2021, where we thought, okay, there was a bit of a blip there. Red Bull stole an early advantage, but Mercedes have come back. And now we're just going to have the same old season. Mercedes is just going to romp off into the sunset. That was not the case, and it went back and forth all season. This was the case today. Red Bull winning the individual battle at Imola. But we know Ferrari have the capability to strike back. And I suspect we're set up for a season-long battle between those two constructors in particular. It is noticeable that you mentioned at the top, there was a Grand Slam win in Australia and a Grand Slam win in Imola, which is when you win a race from pole with the fastest lap, lead every lap of the race. This is the first time in history that it has happened in consecutive races with two different drivers in two different constructors. So that gives you an idea that this pendulum is going to tip back and forth all season long, and it's the longest season in history. So yeah, there's a lot of racing to be done.
And that's the interesting thing, isn't it, Matt? And because it's, like you said, I agree, they're very much going to be Ferrari and Red Bull looking very close indeed. And I think we're going to see ebb and flow through the whole season. But the big question is really, can Mercedes catch up? You know, that's the big question that everyone's been asking at the beginning of this year. And Mercedes just had the worst weekend, I think, in a long time. So, you know, a lot of head scratching going in there. And hopefully, we'll hear from some Lewis Hamilton fans later on as well.
I think if I look at the performance of Max today, I think it was a surprise, wasn't it? I mean, he stopped lap 20 to get off the intermediates onto the mediums. A few laps after, I think Daniel Ricciardo was the first person to do that, but, you know, pretty much around the right time, let's say. And then stopped again on lap 52 to get off the mediums onto the soft tyres. That was kind of slightly defensive, wasn't it, towards the end after Ferrari Charles Leclerc stopped. Then he finished 16 seconds down the road from his own teammate. That, to me, was a surprise, given that, I think, Sean, you were saying it, you know, had only led 6 laps in the 3 Grand Prix so far this season. Marlon, were you surprised by how strong the Red Bulls were this weekend?
I think a bit more so, yes, because, I mean, for me, the result that Red Bull has as a whole, especially with Perez, you know, I think there's just a solid structure within Red Bull in which they now know how to win world titles. And, you know, Perez was still 15 seconds behind Max, but he did what he needed to do, which was just secure positions, put himself in between Leclerc and Verstappen. And he was just in it throughout the fight. I mean, the pit stops, maybe Red Bull could have done 1 lap earlier for Checo to not have this issue where he had to fight through Leclerc to gain back the position, obviously having done 1 more lap. But I think, you know, Red Bull just seemed to be very gathered. They're not, obviously, with the previous results, panicking yet. And it's just the experience. And I think you just see a really good, solid duo. You do see a clear-cut number 1 and number 2 in the team, whereas Ferrari, they don't really have this solid foundation, I think, sometimes. And it kind of got exposed today, in my opinion, here in Imola.
Yeah, and Red Bull won too. And then the next car up, of course, was a McLaren of Lando Norris. Sean, any interesting stats around that?
Well, as you mentioned, it's the third time we've raced in Italy where Norris has ended up on the podium. So it's obviously it's his lucky nation when it comes to finishing on the podium. I think what will get forgotten by history is that mistake that Leclerc made late in that race, because at that point he was going to be still 35 points clear in the championship. By making that mistake, suddenly he brought Verstappen within striking range. Now, admittedly, he did recover. He did get back up into the top 6. He's still more than a complete victory and a fastest lap point in the lead. But, as I mentioned before, it's a very long season. And not only do we have more races than we've ever had before, we've also got these very high-paying sprint events as well. There's still another 16 points to score just in sprint qualifying this year. So it's all up for grabs. You know, these are gaps that can be closed in a single weekend, where previously you would have said, oh yeah, he's out of sight. A single bad weekend in a sprint format can suddenly make or break a season, which I suspect is exactly what Lewis Hamilton is feeling like right now while he's on the way to the airport.
Yeah, I think, you know, this year is going to be very close, isn't it? Sean and Matt and Marlon, because we saw last year how close it was between Hamilton and Verstappen, where you just can't afford to make these sort of mistakes. And even, you know, Leclerc had done the mistake, and yes, you could argue whether he was over pushing or not, but the car seemed okay after that. And at that point, you know, okay, he was P4. I was quite surprised Ferrari called him in to straight away, because the car seemed fine, and I thought, okay, he's lost the end plate on the front wing. At the most, he'll drop back maybe 1 place, maybe 2 positions. At the most, I would have still been 4th or 5th. But coming in for the pit stop, they really put themselves under pressure, didn't they? Because you know, he had to drive super hard just to get back up to 6th.
Well, yeah. I mean, if I may interject, remember that if they'd left him out and something had failed, then they might have lost all those points as well, and they would have looked like idiots. So they were probably thinking, look, okay, let's bank the 8 points that are going here. We'll still be P6. Let's get those in the bag. Let's get out of here. and let's still be, a race win ahead. Whereas if they'd left him out and something had failed, they would have been, you can imagine, Gazzetta dello Sport in the morning. It would have been the end of days. Why did you do that? Especially with Sainz already in the sandpit after 10 seconds of the race.
And I think also, Sean, to kind of add there, I think it's been a bit of a reckoning for Ferrari. I mean, since the last time basically Ferraris won a championship, that was 2007 with Kimi Räikkönen, almost like 15 years since they've been in this position, leading a world championship, having a car that's capable of fighting at the front. And they're obviously going against like very strong protagonists in Red Bull, who just recently won a world championship. So it's now, they know they have the car, they know they can fight for wins, they know they have a fast driver in Charles, and Sainz obviously finishing the way he did last year, even beating Leclerc. They know they can have a good, solid team going for this championship. But it's, having the pressure of the fans, being in front of an Italian home crowd on home soil, and in one of the biggest races that Ferrari can make a statement, it was actually the exact opposite, and it kind of crumbled for Ferrari from the mistake from Leclerc to actually his slow start, I think, to the beginning of the race in which they actually got into this position. So, there's going to be a lot of thinking, I think, in Maranello, and they're definitely going to have to look forward to, forgetting about this weekend, put it in the bag. Charles still did get points. He still has the world championship in his hands right now, but they really have to step up to the pressure.
And that's right, isn't it? Because whenever you hear anybody ex-Ferrari in particular, right, who used to race at Ferrari or was in the management, and they talk about it, the number one topic is pressure. It's always about, the Michael Schumacher years were great because Jean Todt was a kind of firewall keeping the media away. And in the days before Jean Todt, the engineers would be looking through the newspaper in the morning, as you said, Sean, to see what the media thought of them. And I felt that today. I remember thinking, they've got this guy in the garage and that guy in the garage and the crowd's cheering and playing the national anthem. This is the day when Ferrari trip over their own tails. And, I think we all want to see Ferrari do well, particularly at home, because it's going to look so good. But to me, the Sainz incident is doubly bad because it was really not his fault. But it's just going to be, what is it? He's now done. Remind us on the point scoring streak, and then today what happened.
Well, if I remember correctly, he'd scored in 17 consecutive races and finished 31 in a row. And now he's done one lap in 2 Grand Prix. So, that shows you, it's a reminder, and Mercedes' performance as well this year is also a reminder that this past success is no guarantee of what you're going to get from weekend to weekend. And that's why I say, Red Bull had the March this weekend, just as Ferrari did in Australia. But that pendulum can swing very quickly, and with these new regs as well, of course, the third wheel of this, Mercedes, when are they going to get back to where they normally are? Because we're in a new generation of regs, it's very possible that they could claw back something. Perhaps they won't win the championship this year, but they could claw something back because there's bigger gains to be made. And I would add, the problem that Mercedes seem to have right now, hate to say this, seems to be more of a Lewis Hamilton problem than a George Russell problem. Russell, top 5 at every Grand Prix this year. He's the only driver to do that. But Hamilton has kind of been up and down, which is very un-Lewis-like, but it's been a long time since he's had a car this bad.
And I know what Sean's doing here, because we were talking about Carlos Sainz, and this is the second time that Sean has brought up the topic of Lewis Hamilton, because he's trying to wind up the LH44 army on. By the way, go for it, because that's what this show is all about. We want interaction. Actually, I want to go to our first question that we've had coming, because you just mentioned 2022 cars here. Let's have a look at the first question, which is from Dennis, and he's asking the question, we used to say that Sainz was so adaptable when moving across those 3 teams. Why has he struggled to adapt to the 2022 car? I think this is one for you, Alex, and also in the context of Ferrari just signed him to a new 2-year contract.
Yeah. Is he adaptable? Yeah. I mean, Sainz is a top-class driver. Just like any other driver, like most drivers on this grid, you've seen him swap different teams and they've adapted really well. Has Sainz adapted to the 2022 car? I'm not so sure if it's a case of him adapting to the 22 car or just the fact that Leclerc's done such a good job. Leclerc's really raised his level. I mean, to be honest, Leclerc's level's also been high last year as well. But yes, okay, he's started a bit stronger than Sainz this year with the 22 car, but it's not big differences. It's very small, fine margins. Sainz's drive yesterday was really good. He got up to P4 from P10. Couldn't have done anything about what happened in the first lap when Ricciardo hit him into the gravel. It does snowball, though. We do see these things snowball, but I don't think we can write off Sainz just yet. It's still too early. He's a top-class driver, and yes, he's a little bit behind compared to Leclerc, but it's very small margins.
So that's covered the Carlos Sainz argument. We are going to get, Sean, don't worry, we are going to get to the Lewis Hamilton debate. We're allowing the Lewis Hamilton army.
Don't worry, I'm already jumping headfirst into it.
Yeah, they're encircling the castle at the moment. But before we get into
they're encircling my Twitter as well, by the way.
Excellent. Keep encircling Sean's Twitter. In the meantime, I want to look at the race performance chart because I want to look at the good news before we get too deeply into the bad news. Here it is. And I love this. Look at that. So we've got Charles Leclerc, who's bad boy, -4. But look at that. George Russell +7. And Alex Albon isn't in the top 10, but we put him here, the image of Alex, dear Alex, because he also managed to climb 7 places today. Fantastic. Let's talk about George Russell. Marlon, did you race against George in your formative years? His formative years?
I did not, unfortunately, race against George. I think he's a mega talent. He was.
I would say, can I just say, by the way, probably good you didn't race against him, knowing how good he is, probably.
Yeah, no, he's obviously a fantastic driver. I think he was a couple of batches lower than me, but already, I think at the time when I was either in World Series or most probably GP2, I knew of George racing against Ocon as well and some of the other Lotus juniors. And he was already a big name in the making, was showcasing his talents already in a junior level in terms of Formula cars. And really, the most surprising thing, well, not really surprising actually, because we already saw his potential when he came in for Bahrain when Lewis Hamilton tested positive for COVID and, set a stunning pole position. Or actually took the lead of the race from Bottas in that race and was looking to win in his debut with Mercedes. But unfortunately, obviously, he was a bit unlucky. But the fact that he's actually just so confidently, beating, it's only 4 races. I mean, Lewis Hamilton, don't get me wrong, we should never count out. But I mean, for today's race, I'd kind of say that Lewis kind of looked like Bottas to Lewis at the time that they were teammates. It was very big difference. I mean, you never expect Lewis to be too far off, but he was running at 14th or 15th at some point in the race with George constantly in the top 5. So that margin's honestly too big. And I think Lewis actually has to kind of do some work and catch up to George at this point.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get stuck into the Lewis Hamilton conversation. And slightly doing this now because I'm worried about what's coming up. We've got a great question coming in, which is my way of deflecting now this. John the Storyteller asks, Lewis Hamilton, greatest of all time with the fastest car on the grid, rubbish with a mediocre car. Discuss. Sean, discuss.
It depends, when it comes to this definition, greatest of all time, it depends by what metric you're measuring. Because, yes, statistically speaking, Lewis Hamilton is undisputably the greatest driver of all time. I mean, he leads in wins, he leads in poles, he's tied with Schumacher in championships. There are many Hamilton fans who said he was robbed of his 8th world title in Abu Dhabi last year. So there's more than enough evidence to say Hamilton belongs in that debate, unquestionably. But, and I hate to say this, but it is a basic truth of Formula One, and indeed all of racing. There's only so much you can do with the equipment you have. And it's fair to say that Hamilton would not be winning titles if he had a car that was as quick as the Williams, for instance. With that said, you could always say, well, look what Hamilton's doing with that car, even when it's not such a good car. Take 2009, when Heikki Kovalainen was his teammate. Kovalainen, a GP2 race winner, title contender against Nico Rosberg. We knew he was very capable. Was absolutely taken to the woodshed by Hamilton that year. I mean, Hamilton won with that car, which was a dog of a car. I mean, it wasn't even getting out of Q1, and eventually it turned into a race winner, but only with Lewis. What we have this year is a situation where Lewis is way down the back, while the other guy is contending for top 4. So at some point, you've got to look in the mirror and say, is it me? It's not just the car. Yes, the car is not as good as it normally is, but at some point, there has to be a reckoning, say, I need to sort this out, because the other guy is giving me a hiding every week. And as I just said on Twitter, and as Marlon just alluded to, if Bottas had been doing this performance, we would have said, why does he have that seat? Now, I'm not saying that they should get rid of Hamilton, because obviously there's a lot of stock there. He's won a lot of Grand Prix. There's no need to panic. But there does need to be something of a coming together, a huddle, maybe hit the reset button and think, okay, just forget about this. Let's start the season again in Miami.
Okay, so we've also just circled around the argument quite nicely, actually, Sean, on both sides. You've done that. I see you doing that balancing act quite nicely. But you're right. I mean, 2 bad races does not make a great driver less great, right? Yeah, so it's still too early to say this sort of thing. I think, it's too early in the season still for all that other caveats that Hamilton could get back on top of it and could be fine. But I think a large part of what is so interesting about the noise coming out about Hamilton, how now he's not in such a good car, he's crap, and all these sort of strong comments and stuff, is also, I think, partly accentuated by the fact that everyone thought Hamilton was so great, because he won so easily in a Mercedes. And I think people overlook the fact of how important a car plays in that. And, there were many times, we talked about this a lot of times on the show, Matt, about how Hamilton was, he'd do a really good job, or Bottas would do a really good job. But we brought up the show because in a lot of those years, he's only racing his teammate. It's a race of 2 cars. So when you only race 2 drivers, you only race 1 driver, you are going to get less sharp. I don't care what you say. Whereas if you're mixing it up with a super competitive field and you're racing against, a lot of cars, you do get sharper. So I'm not surprised to see maybe some small dips from Hamilton this year, especially when he's racing in the pack. But I think the strength of the feeling we get with the Lewis Hamilton fans is because they think he walks on water. But you have to remember, he doesn't really walk on water. He's still a great driver, but it's accentuated by the fact that he had such a good car.
He doesn't water ski like you, is what you're basically saying, Alex, isn't it? But I think you're absolutely right, because although he does surf quite well, I believe, that's another thing we need to bear in mind when it comes to walking on water. But being more serious, I mean, he's had 2 bad results, right? He's had the one in Saudi when he badly qualified.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I mean, he's had the best finishing position, same finishing position as George. They both had a 3rd place. Yeah. They both had a fourth place. He's had a couple of bad ones. And he started 3 or 4 places down the road, and he started 14th today, I think, rather than 11th. Yeah. So I think it's one of those things where, I'm with you. I can see, because I think he's down in the mouth as well. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons why people think, his performance isn't very good. Watching his lap times, you never really know whether it's because he's in traffic or whatever. So I think the jury's out, and I hope the jury continues to debate it with us. Go on then.
Yeah, I was going to say, I refer you to Michael Schumacher's 2005 season, because he'd won 5 consecutive world titles. Ferrari won 15 Grand Prix in 2004. They absolutely waltzed it in 2004. Come 2005, when everybody jumped ship from Bridgestone to go to Michelin, Ferrari suddenly had a combination of not enough tyre development and a relatively poor car. Had it been not for that 6-car debacle at Indianapolis, Ferrari would not have won a race in 2005. And everybody thought, Schumacher jumped the shark. I mean, is it completely over for Michael Schumacher? They came back in 2006. Schumacher came within an ace of winning the World Championship in 2006, but for that engine failure at Suzuka, he was leading the championship, he was leading the race. Engine, let's go. Basically handed it to Alonso on a plate there. It was a good championship battle, of course. Alonso was a worthy champion. Yeah. But I would caution against obviously thinking, well, Lewis is obviously over the hill, because we all know that he's somebody with that a level of skill is perfectly capable of coming back.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Let's have a look at the Drivers' Championship standings. Let's see where Carl Hamilton sits there. Well, he's not even in the top 10. No, he's 7th. There he is. Okay, that's not too bad. So there's the championship points. Alex, what do you think about those? Max Verstappen's jumped up, hasn't he?
Well, I was surprised to see Max go. Where was he last race? 8th or something? So that's a nice jump of points for him. But while Leclerc's still got a pretty handy gap at the moment, but although this early in the season, that's not a gap at all. It can close down quite quickly. Russell there, super consistent at the moment. Sean just mentioned it, top, so he's 4th in championship. Sainz in 5th. Who else looks good there? Norris there in 6th, some handy points today. Bottas too as well. And Magnussen there. It's really nice to see. Magnussen's a bit of a feel-good story this year as well. Scored some handy points there to beat P10.
And little shout out here to Tessa, who's been working hard behind the scenes to add on that right-hand side there the yellow, the green and the red arrows to show us. And it does. It points out that George Russell's, despite finishing very well today in 4th, has dropped down 2 positions in the standings. Let's have a look. Marlon, before I go on, any thoughts on the Drivers' Championship?
Yeah, I think just to add on to Alex pointing out K-Mag there, I mean, it's just really been a great story to see Magnussen returning. Obviously, for the Haas team, I think it's a driver who just has the ultimate confidence and they just gelled perfectly together. But also, just one thing to point out, I think Magnussen is really showcasing his skill because you also see a bit of the trouble that Schumacher has gotten into. And I think that's kind of a subject because Schumacher for the longest time has been really touted as a young talent coming into Formula One. And I'd actually say a lot of the young talents so far on the Formula One grid have been doing their performance or outperforming their more experienced teammates. But in the case of K-Mag, I think he's a really high benchmark compared to what Schumacher has experienced in terms of Mazepin or some other teammates in the past, even maybe in his junior career. But K-Mag, and he's actually someone I've raced against, and you really see the level that he's bringing with Haas and almost a difference in performance. I mean, Schumacher was struggling, spinning out, trying to look for grip. And in this case, K-Mag's constantly fighting in the points, even sometimes at the front of the grid, and always being solid in terms of driving, defending. I think he's really hitting his stride in his Formula One career. And you're just seeing these pieces come together. He's a bit more toned down. He's not as aggressive. You don't see as much incidents. And I think he's really, the second chance he's getting, he's really trying to make the most out of it.
He's doing a good job. He's carrying the Haas team. Let's look at the Constructor Standings because Haas team currently have 15 points. They're there in 8th place. And again, the Red Bull team, nice green arrow against them, jumping up into 2nd place. And getting pretty close to Ferrari there. Mercedes drop down 1 place. McLaren stay where they are. Alfa Romeo jump up a place to 5th, ahead of Alpine, AlphaTauri, Haas. Aston Martin and Williams. I think we've got a question about Aston Martin coming in. Let's have a look at this, which one it is. Question number 3. Where is it? There it is. They scored their first points in this race. Is it a sign of improving performance, do we think, or was it the change in the weather conditions, or the mixed up weather conditions?
Oof. Good question.
Who wants to take that?
Conditions. Yeah, mix up with the weather conditions. Vettel's had a great first few laps, and he really took advantage of the incident between Sainz and Ricciardo. The early pit stop, I think Vettel was one of the earliest pit stops because as soon as Ricciardo went green, Ricciardo was the first guy to switch to slicks, but as soon as the middle sector went green, we saw Vettel come into the pit stop. And I think that was quite key for Vettel to get into, because it moved him up quite high into the top 10 at that point.
So McLaren were there. They're 4th in the Constructors' Championships, and those of you that watch the show regularly will know that WebEx is a supporter of both the McLaren racing team, but also the Go F1 show. Let's find out a little bit more.
Who's got the best fans?
That's a very good question.
Let's put up a poll.
Come on, England.
Jayo! Look who's got the best fans.
Yes!
With WebEx, the McLaren F1 team and their fans are competing like never before.
Okay.
WebEx, driving hybrid work.
Welcome back, or if you just joined us, welcome. We're breaking down we're going to call it the Imola Grand Prix because the official name is way too long. And if you didn't catch the Grand Prix, well, the winner was one Max Verstappen, who led it from pole position, led every single lap, and indeed took the fastest lap point with him for good measure. And he's now 2nd in the World Drivers' Championship, closing in on the 2 Ferrari drivers. Let's talk a little bit about the sprint weekend format. This is the first of 3 this year. Sean and I are having a debate about this, about pole position and the terminology. Go on, Sean.
Well, we're not having a debate. What we're having is a clarification in that you're wrong and I'm right. So it's not a debate. It's me telling you what the correct answer is. But do go on.
Well, my view has always been, don't forget, I've got 2 racing drivers with me here. So I think I think racing drivers like the idea of, you go home on a Saturday night or Friday night and you've won the pole, you've got pole position. Whether or not you actually start from pole position is sort of somewhat irrelevant. But so, Alex, help me on this one. Do you agree with me that pole position is the award for being fastest in qualifying?
Yeah, the fastest lap has to matter. But I'm not too interested in this conversation, to be honest, this argument, because I think it's just going to go on for a little bit, and then they'll make a decision. I don't know if I like it or not, but yeah, if you ask me from a pure driver's point of view, it has to be whoever's at the fastest lap in the session.
I think I can add to that, actually, Matthew,
Go for it.
just coming from
Help me, Marlon.
experience, because
As long as you're helping me, you can carry on.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give my best driver's perspective on it. But when I was racing in GP3 and obviously coming into F2 eventually, or GP2 at the time, the FIA and obviously the championship within Formula One, they sort of experimented with the idea of reverse grids. And to be honest, as a racing driver, I mean, there's no better feeling than knowing on the day itself, when you do qualifying, that you do get the pole position. And even with reverse orders, or basically just mixing up the grid in some form or fashion, or even, changing it up a bit, I think everyone still likes, from my driver's perspective, we all still like the classic format, where it's one session of qualifying. If you're the fastest in that session, your pole position, you deserve to start at the front. And no other situation, I think, should get in the way of that. Like, if you truly want to accept, like, being the quickest driver that weekend. So qualifying for any driver, I think you can kind of feel the most proud. And when it's a bit, manufactured, I wouldn't say, it's maybe a strong word. I don't think racing drivers like it too much. They definitely want to have the outright pole.
I should clarify that, of course, I'm happy because this year pole position is in the record books to Max Verstappen because he was fastest in qualifying on Friday. But Sean, that you don't like that because he didn't. Well, he actually did in the end, didn't he? But he might not have actually started from pole for the Grand Prix. That's your concern.
Yeah, it comes back to how pole position is actually defined, because pole position has never been defined as being the driver fastest over one lap. The pole position has always been credited to the driver who is in first place on the official starting grid for the Grand Prix, no matter how that was achieved. It doesn't matter whether it was Monaco 1950 when the pole position went to the driver who was quickest in the first practice session, and then the first two rows were locked in, and then all the other guys had to qualify after that. It doesn't matter if we go to the late 2000s when Q3 was run on race fuel, so you could actually put 3 laps of fuel in the car, guarantee yourself pole position, even though you were obviously slower than other guys who were running half a tank of fuel. This happened most notoriously in that 6-car Indianapolis 05 race when Toyota knew they were not going to be racing on Sunday, so they put 3 laps of fuel in Trulli's car and took pole position. That's not a fair fight, but nonetheless, pole position was accredited to Trulli because he was in first place on the starting grid in Sunday's race. What this change of definition will now do is give this incredible dichotomy in the record books of, hang on a minute, I read that Verstappen was on pole, and I've come here today and Leclerc's on pole. What's happened there? Wait, there was another race, fair enough. So, and also, wait, Ferrari have locked out the front row, but you said Red Bull were on pole. So how are they locked out the front row, but Verstappen's on pole? And Verstappen, theoretically today, it was theoretically possible. It didn't happen. We've kicked this can down the road. But it was theoretically possible today for Verstappen to have a Grand Slam victory and start from last on the grid. He would have had a win from pole with the fastest lap and lead every lap, but started 20th on the grid. Now, that gets very complicated to deal with very, very quickly. And you also remember that qualifying wasn't always one session. There were 2 sessions. Sometimes there were as many as 4 sessions up until the late 1960s. So it was never the basis of a single hour. It was never the basis of just knockout. It was, there was an elimination format, which we tried for 2 races in 2016 before we all realized it was rubbish. There was a 2-lap aggregate in 2005. It was theoretically possible for a driver to be on pole without leading either session. If they had the fastest aggregate time, they would be on pole. So it was not defined by that. It was always defined simply who is in first place on the official starting grid. That was the only definition we ever had. It's Germany 1959, the first time it ever happened where a driver was fastest in qualifying but wasn't on pole. So there's plenty of precedent, and I feel like we've gone away from that, and now it's caused all sorts of problems. I'll shut up now. I'm really sorry. I get on a rant when I get onto this.
And it's good that you've done that, Sean. Actually, we did a poll, and we should have a look at the poll results quickly, Alex, which was that we actually asked our followers.
Can I change my answer? Because I like Sean's answer. I'm going to go vote with him. And
it's interesting because I was able to express my manifesto when we did this tweet, and we got and in inverted commas, I won. Not that I really won, but I think you're absolutely right. The more we hear Sean describe it, the more we realise that there's still something not quite right about the system, in particular for the word, the title.
I would say, Matt.
I want to talk about the weekend itself. How do we feel about the sprint weekend as a format itself? Do we prefer it to a regular weekend, or do we, not even that, are we happy with it to happen 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 times a season?
Can I go with that?
For me?
I just want to jump in if you don't mind. I do like keeping it simpler. I don't like this whole that we get to the end of the looking at the history books. Oh, these little sprint races here. Not quite sure if they're races or qualifying sessions. Let's just define them clearly. And I think I'm on board with what Sean has just said. Do I like them? I actually like it because it mixes it up a bit throughout the year, and maybe we should try some other interesting stuff like this. Ultimately, I'm more traditionalist. I do like the fact that we have one big race, and that should be the main thing that everyone builds to. But I do like that. I wouldn't like to see any more races, to be honest. I think 3 is just a nice number. But I do like the little bit of variety that it brings.
I'm going to say that I like it because I like that the weekend has got lots of action. I like that the fact the teams aren't very well prepared. I like that I had a qualifying session to watch on Friday night. I had a race to watch on Saturday, and then another one today. I think it's quite a nice way of ending the weekend. But mixing it up is the best thing overall. I want to talk a little bit about Lewis, and then I want to go back and talk about some of the people who did particularly well this weekend as well, others who performed well. So let's just talk about the Lewis thing. There was some news earlier this weekend about him being involved in a bid for the Chelsea Football Club. What do we think about that?
Well, he's an Arsenal fan, isn't he? That was the thing that I found so curious. Like, does he want to buy Chelsea to get them relegated because he's an Arsenal fan? Is that what's going on? It's all a big insider job, Yeah, good luck to him. I mean, if he's got that kind of money to throw around, then yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Is it a distraction? I suppose that's one of the questions.
No, I don't believe that.
Yeah, but it adds to a strategy of becoming a global icon. It's, the same sort of thing Beckham did, didn't he?
Exactly.
There's a lot of steps that Hamilton take. His eyes always been on greatness and global icon. Maybe he's preparing for a future after Formula One.
It's not like Hamilton has let things slip in the last, 7 or 8 years. I mean, you can't accuse the guy of taking his eye off the ball. Yes, he's had a couple of bad weekends, but we don't say, oh, he's over the hill. I mean, he has been spectacular. And the Beckham thing is a great example because Beckham was always accused of that. But if you actually watched him on the pitch, he was the best player out there. You just thought, well, I mean, if this is the guy when he's distracted, how good is he when he's supposedly got his head in the game? And I think the same with Lewis. Like, I have so much respect for Lewis for being able to do all these other things, extracurricular activities, and still keep his head in the game. Because, winning all these world championships, good car or bad car, still requires such commitment.
And maybe actually it's an advantage because he's not overthinking the thing he has to do. He's got a team of people around him, of course, within the Mercedes structure, but also I think in his other activities that manage all of his logistics and so on. And he can just use his brain. I need to think about this. I need to drive the car this way. I need to tell these people what to do. And then I need to move on to whatever it is, Fashion Week or a football team or surfing.
Yeah,
or whatever it is.
And he's not the first sports player to have that. LeBron James, another example. He's a minority owner of Liverpool Football Club. No one talks about that. Is he not concentrating on the basketball because he's too busy watching Liverpool? No one says that to him. So, I don't think it's noteworthy, but I don't think it's not the reason why Hamilton finished wherever he was today. That's for sure.
No. Good question about Valtteri Bottas. Coming in from, I think it's Oliver Rust. Here it is, Oliver, good question. Amazed that nobody's spoken about Bottas Alpha. We were about to, Oliver, trust me. Do we think Alfa Romeo is a top 4 team at the moment? I think we might look at the race performance chart as we're talking about this as well. That might be quite useful. Bottas did do a good job today. He climbed up, how many positions did he climb up? He was up just 2, actually, I suppose, because he did start well. But nonetheless, a very strong, what do you think? Bottas, first of all, and Alfa as a team. Marlon?
I'll take that, Matthew. Yeah, I think and also Bottas was another driver I raced against in GP3, and I think he still is. He's very well talked about, obviously, in our junior careers. I think he's still a talent, and it's just, I guess, it's the funny circus of Formula One sometimes, where we have these topics of whether Hamilton was on point or not for this weekend or like the last couple races, simply because George has been doing a good job. But if you think about it, it's kind of a mirror of almost what happened last year, where Bottas in the Mercedes was being hounded by George Russell and the Williams, and they had their incident. And you kind of had this, I guess, funny irony of Bottas chasing down now George Russell into the first two corners, trying to overtake with an Alfa Romeo, which we kind of wouldn't have expected really this year. I didn't even expect them to be that strong. But I mean, Bottas, seems comfortable. I think he kind of knows that he has the experience on his teammate in Zhu, who I think is still a very talented driver. He's had actually very good results, was in the junior program for Alpine as well, did all the training in Enstone, the same program I did in Lotus Formula One. And I think he's still a good product of that academy. But Bottas, I think, is comfortable. He's able to score points. He looks quick. He can fight for, overtaking. Whether he really pulls the overtakes, that's always been kind of an issue or question with him, whether he really has that killer instinct to really fight for it and go for the move. But I think he's been very solid, and it's just kind of funny because he was able to really show something to Russell towards the end of that race, and in Alpha finishing in the top 5. So I think they're very good for the season.
First Alpha, was it P5 since Brazil 2019? That's a Sean stat that I'm stealing there.
Yes, sir.
It's the Ferrari engine,
I
isn't
don't
it? That's what's given them the performance, right? Particularly over the Mercedes in the straight line.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that that's part of it. They seem to have found something in the power unit that wasn't there previously. But with Bottas, I also felt, I kind of got on Bottas's case at some points in his Mercedes career, thinking, come on, like, you've just got to beat Hamilton. How hard can it be? He said. And the thing is, Bottas was very quick over one lap. He was, he could beat Hamilton over one lap. He had the capability. Over 60 laps, usually it was a different story. But with that said, I knew when he was off to Alpha, I thought, well, I feel like that's a big upgrade over Kimi. I think Kimi's been phoning this in for years and frankly trading on past glory and should have retired several years earlier. Bottas, on the other hand, I feel like he has a point to prove. Like, oh, so you didn't think I was good enough? Well, watch this. And you're seeing, huge superiority early in the season over Guan Yu Zhou. Zhou is, very capable. He was a very consistent podium finisher in F2, a race winner. And Bottas has been terrific this year. And I think it's going a long way to rebuild his reputation and reminding everybody of what he was in those junior formula, like Marlon mentioned in GP3 when he won the title. He was always a great driver. Perhaps we know he couldn't match Lewis on race day, but that doesn't mean that when he goes to somewhere like Alpha, who are down in like 9th in the Constructors' Championship, what a difference it makes.
Yeah, I think he's being flattered by the Ferrari engine.
Oh, ye of little faith.
I'm just looking to Alex to see what he's thinking. I can see he's thinking about something there.
Well, you got a good argument there because you got a Haas up with them as well, right? It's kind of coincidental. You could be a bit cynical and say it's kind of coincidental that both Alfa Romeo and Haas have made such a big jump, Well,
I don't think it is a coincidence. I think there is merit to that because remember in 2014, the first year of the hybrid regulations, the Mercedes, if you had a Mercedes power unit, you were set. Whereas if you had a Ferrari, you were nowhere. So there is merit to that claim, but that's not all there is. And Valtteri is driving the wheels off that thing right now.
Yeah, there's another element to the race today, and actually David Gonzalez asks for our opinions about the DRS only being allowed, as he puts it, kind of late, which is the right way of describing it, into the race. I think it was lap 30 or so, wasn't it, when the guys were fully onto the dry weather tyres. And that's going to certainly have helped people maybe like Valtteri, who some degree were protected by other people not having DRS to climb up through the field. Lewis Hamilton being an obvious example of somebody who might have got further up the field earlier.
Good question. I want to hear Marlon's answer on this. Marlon, what do you think as a driver? Would you have been okay if the DRS had come out 5 laps earlier and there were wet patches down that main straight?
Depends if I was trying to overtake someone or trying to keep someone behind me. So I think that's a great question, Alex. And I think the decision for DRS to come late was, I think, the right one with the FIA. Obviously, it was variable conditions. I think Imola, as a first of all, on the calendar at this time of the year, I think it's great to see races there. For whatever reason, it seems to always be variable, and it has all the makings of a classic GP every time we go there. So it's strategy, it's timing slicks on a drying circuit, and obviously the FIA needs to work and make decisions on when they can enable DRS for the drivers to allow more overtaking. But I think, with how it was in the previous years, maybe with Bottas's and Russell's incident, they obviously look back on records of past races and maybe try and improve on when they should indicate like DRS should be enabled. I think the FIA pretty much got it right. There was overtaking even without it. We still got pretty good moments throughout the GP. So I think it was okay. But I mean, if I was in the situation, if I was trying to overtake or chase someone, for sure I would have wanted it earlier. If someone was behind me, just don't enable it if you can the entire race, if that's possible, so.
Certainly helped the Red Bulls earlier in the race. That's all the time we've got today, unfortunately. It's been fantastic, gentlemen, to have you on the show to debate all of these topics. We could go on deeper into the night as it is in Asia, or the morning where you are, Sean. Sean, people can follow you on social media. Remind us your Twitter handle.
My Twitter handle is @VirtualStatman. I occasionally dive into statistics, but the rest of the time I'm telling Team L8 that their driver's completely over the hill and washed up, and he's got absolutely no chance whatsoever.
Also quite sarcastic. Marlon, are you a Twitter user, or are you more of an Instagrammer?
I'm a bit, from the younger gen, so IG is mainly where I'm at, but I do use Twitter, of course. I love Twitter, especially for Formula One, getting stats, seeing the updates from Alex, Matthew, the whole group on Go F1. So you can also follow me, Marlon Stockinger, on Instagram, and letter M Stockinger. I'm Stockinger on Twitter too.
You are Stockinger.
I love how he says how Instagram is a younger generation. Instagram's older generation now, mate. Well, it's going to be TikTok and whatever's coming next.
TikTok's next for sure. Maybe Twitch or something.
I'm going to update my MySpace page. Hang on a sec.
Excellent. And of course, our show is at Go F1 Show. Don't forget, we have a website, which is gofone.tv. You can watch the show there live and on demand, but we also have clips of the show that we post obviously after it. And we also have bonus content coming up. So we're going to be having a chat with people like Marlon, some Q&A with him that will go up later this week, perhaps. We're going to do interviews with various drivers. We might show snippets on this live show, but we'll have the full length on the website, gofone.tv. That's it. That's all we've got time for. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. 2 weeks' time, the Miami Grand Prix is up next. See you at the beach.